We're now going to turn to a different subject, aquatic or blue foods, and how we can make seafood more sustainable. So joining me for this conversation, we have Chris Ninnes, the CEO of the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. Round of applause as I say people's names. Daisy Berg, the Seafood Category Manager for New Seasons Market. And Abe Ng, the CEO of Sushi Maki. So I want to acknowledge before we begin just a few more of our in-kind partners who will create a fantastic lunch that is coming up very soon. So big thanks to Farmer's Fridge, Tyndall, and Salad and Go. Round of applause, everyone. So, Chris, if I can start with you, nice to see you. Nice to see your sucker. It's that time of year. I'm hoping that you can provide some background for everyone in the room. For those of us who might not be familiar, how important are blue food systems for the global food system itself and nutrition security?
Absolutely essential. If you look at it from an international perspective, seafood is one of the most traded commodities known. Over 3 billion people rely on seafood to form a major part of their animal protein consumption. Mm-hmm. So it's huge. And the discussion that you had just now is fascinating because in a way it captures what's happening here in the US, but that in itself is just a microcosm of all of the community impacts that international trade and that seafood development actually can have. And all of the questions that were discussed are equally relevant globally.
Right.
And when you think that on the farming side of things, over 100 million tons of seafood is actually farmed. We consume more farmed fish than we do wild. By some estimates, in terms of the global system of by 2050, the estimate that you will need double the seafood for everybody on the planet. Remember, we've a growing population, growing affluence, and all of that drives seafood consumption. So it is a huge challenge for all of us. And if we don't get to producing that food in a more sustainable way, where we take into account environmental impacts, but most importantly, those social impacts, then the future looks very, very poor.
So when I was being trained in agriculture and environment and food systems in general, what I learned was farm seafood bad, wild seafood good. And what you're telling me is farmed is the future. Can you explain what has changed and why we're at the place we are now?
I think the perception is misguided. I think that farm seafood is healthy, it's nutritious, and it's absolutely an essential component of the global food system. It does attract negative press, and we've seen some so-called documentaries that really expose some awful practices. But those practices don't represent the norm. They don't represent how seafood is produced globally. Yes, we want to eliminate those practices. It's absolutely essential. But done right, then farm seafood is not only a necessity, it should be a staple of how we think about producing a much more climate-friendly protein.
Yeah, which is needed right now. He's talking about seaspiracy. I can say it, he can't. Daisy, Daisy, I feel like you and I have a lot in common and I can't see you, and I'm sorry. It's all right, it's my fault. You described yourself as a farmed seafood convert, and I'm wondering what made you change your mind.
First off, I think we went to the same school, farmed seafood bad, wild seafood good. I work for a grocery chain in Portland, Oregon. We have been open since 2000. It's called New Seasons Market, and I oversee the seafood program there. And when I inherited the sourcing for the company for seafood 10 years ago, although I've been with the company for 17 years, We had from the very beginning, from day one, said no farm seafood, and that really applied to salmon and shrimp. Those are the two that everyone thinks about when they say farm seafood is bad. Fast forward some years, new ownership, new leadership comes in. They keep asking me to look for a fresh salmon year-round. And I say we don't need it. We have a beautiful wild-caught coho. I know the fishermen. We have them freeze it. You will never know that it's frozen when you see it in our cases. I said no over and over and over again, and finally they said, you can't say no anymore. I was like, fine. I will do some work. That was in 2016. I spent some time researching. I basically said to them, look, I'm going to put in my due diligence. I'm going to look for a farm. But if it doesn't fit our criteria, I'm moving on and we're not having this conversation again. Then I had those conversations with those producers and I was blown away. The innovations in farm seafood were massive. There were changes in the way that they were raising the fish. There were changes in the feed. There were changes in the marine components that went into the feed so that there was less wild fish going into the feed to help grow these really nice, healthy fish. At the end of those conversations, there were 5 farms that I wanted to collaborate with. I landed on one, and then the hard part happened. I had to convince our staff, I had to convince our consumers that this was the right direction to go. Keep in mind, I'm in Portland, Oregon. You cannot swing a cat or a catfish without hitting someone that is touched by the wild salmon harvest, whether they're involved in it in processing or they're a fisher. And so I had to convince them, and these people are my friends,
right.
That this was the right direction to go. I got the blessing of of the direct sourcing of the fishers, and then I got the blessing of the staff, and then the consumers that have accepted it as well.
That didn't happen overnight, though.
No.
Can you talk about that process?
Yeah. The process was a really, big campaign between me educating staff. That was the biggest part. Educating myself as well, and admitting that I was wrong. That's tough when you're in a position like mine, I've been in this business since I was a child in the desert. It doesn't make sense, but I've learned a ton about seafood, and I had to convince myself that I needed to open up my mind and see that there were changes, that the environment was not being hurt by these farms anymore, and that the fish coming out of these farms was as healthy and sometimes healthier than wild seafood.
It's so hard to change your mind, and it's hard to change other people's minds, but it's like the best thing that humans can do, right? Like it
Absolutely.
always gives me so much hope that we can change. Abe, I mispronounced your name earlier. I apologize deeply. I'm sorry. I'm wondering if we can turn, so now, like, when we're talking about restaurants, it's very hard to source correctly, to source in a way that you feel good about, that you know your consumers will feel good about. How do you do that, and how do you manage all of those sort of competing interests?
Yeah, so our perspective, I'm a small restaurateur from Miami, Florida, and we have restaurants, we do catering at high-end venues like this, and we actually work with Whole Foods Market and university food courts and airports. So we have kind of a wide range, all in South Florida. And I'm a small business person, and things have to pencil out for it to work. But when we became multi-unit, we needed relentless repeatability or standards in seafood. And I'm not a chef by training, and one of the big stakeholders are our culinary team, and they too used to sniff at anything that wasn't what they were working with for generations. So, but when we started looking at certain items, and that we had to start slowly. And then we started working with organizations like MSC and ASC to find product that was very consistent and was at a high quality standard. And not dissimilar to Daisy, you have to tell the story to your own team members and express to them that it costs more because it's worth more, and all along the way, specifically with farm-caught salmon, like the fat content is better for sashimi and nigiri, and it holds up a little bit better rather than smoking or other types of preparation. So we're very fortunate that for what we do, with raw salmon. It was the right and spectacular choice. All of our salmon is from Northern Europe, Scotland, Faroe Islands, Norway, and but that kind of moved into other fishes too. So 2/3 of all of the fish that we serve at Sushi Maki is sustainable, whether it's wild-caught tuna or our shrimp and our salmon is aquaculture. And our kanikama crab is pod and pollock and cod that's used as the artificial crab meat. So we're super proud that we can really say that our heroic goal of leaving the world a little bit better is enforced by our seafood supply chain.
Yeah, it costs more because it's worth more. We can talk about this in a minute, but that's a hard story to tell. But it makes me think of certifications. And so Chris and Abe, please jump in on this. The certifications like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council help eaters and restaurateurs make better buying decisions and more sustainable buying decisions. Can you talk about that certification process and how it tries to hit the whole supply chain? Because you have to make sure it's like getting to everyone, all of us on this panel.
Absolutely. Well, it starts with a rigorous standard, which is, if you like, a rule book by which the producers have to comply with, and it covers the main environmental impacts and like I said before, really importantly, those social impacts. It also requires that all of the businesses handling that seafood from the farm all the way through to the end buyer is actually also certified so that you can track the traceability of the product. So, for the buyer, you need assurances that what you are actually buying is actually certified product. And that's basically the process. And for us, we have a B2C logo on our pack, which signifies for the consumer, for the shoppers, a message really that, this is a label that you could trust. There's credibility, there's integrity underpinning it, and it makes that buying decision easier.
Yeah.
But there are hundreds of pages in our standards. There are hundreds of pages in our chain of custody standards.
Right.
So these things are complex, but at the end of the day, it's distilled down into that buying choice that businesses make, but also that consumers make, in and around the integrity of the program that we run.
And I wonder, those hundreds of pages, there's probably a lot of evolution that needs to take place. It's more of a living document in some ways, right?
Of course, it's got to change as situations change in the marketplace with the innovation and use of technology at production. We try to set the standards so that it's promoting the best practice in the industry. So those that can achieve it is something that others have to aspire to if they want to reach those same standards and get those market benefits.
Absolutely. Abe and Daisy, I'd love you both to jump in.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of our third-party certification right now, and I think it's a pain, it's costly, but it reminds our team members about what we're doing. And I think, we have 300 team members, and one way we justify it to ourselves is that this is a differentiator for us to attract and retain fantastic frontline team members. I do new team member orientations, and when we talk about benefits like 401k, health benefits, their eyes glaze over. They lean in a little bit when we talk about our sustainability efforts, and if that kind of helps us retain our frontline team members, that's where the magic happens. At the table or at the counter, when somebody says our sushi tastes great, not only does it taste great, it is also sustainable. So, like that is the hardest thing to do. It's so, it's what makes the challenge so great. And me coming to a venue like this kind of re-energizes me because I feel like I'm having the same conversation with my team members, but it's just a different team member, like every 3 months. So that's my life.
You brought up an interesting point to me because you're creating a different skill set, a higher skill set for workers. So, I don't want them to leave your restaurant, but when they do, they can take that with them.
Yeah. Restaurants are the best first jobs, and you're right, you got to latch on to something bigger, and this generation is so suspicious of business. They have such high expectations for business, and, if we can kind of narrow it a little bit, I think it's kind of what makes there to be a little bit more meaning. And a lot of this was inspired by our work with Whole Foods and John Mackey and These Woods about the force for business to be a little bit better, or be a force for good.
Thanks so much, Abe. Daisy, I'd love you to comment as well.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One is I don't do this alone. I partner with an organization called Fishwise. They help me weed my way through the certifications, the assessments, the audits, all of that, because as Danny said, it's ever changing. There's always something that is going to advance forward, and there's always an audit that needs to take place. I did it alone for a lot of years, and it was really difficult. And I don't doubt that it's difficult for many of you in the crowd and many in the world that are looking to buy seafood and have seafood on their plates.
Thank you for bringing up those points. This is for better or for worse. You know, I know more about terrestrial agriculture than I do about aquatic blue systems. And I know for farmers working in fields, organic certification, regenerative organic certification, these things can be difficult, they can be costly, they're time consuming. They're not like, you know, a farmer's forte. This is not her area of expertise. Is there a way to make this certification process easier to do, but still as like sort of hardcore as it needs to be?
That's a tough question. I mean, it's always a balancing act between the robustness of the standard and the scale at which it can be adopted. And certainly, I think for programs like ours, a big challenge for us into the future is to answer just that very same problem. But how do we make this applicable to more people? Because if you think about the context, say even in the U.S. market, 90% of the seafood that everybody here consumes is imported.
Right.
2 million tons of that comes from farm production.
Right.
And so the buying choices people make in the room will help drive those systems forward as well. And it really is an international one. You know, what's consumed here has an impact internationally. And we need to think about this system in a global context as well, which really means having scale to get to have it more impact.
Right. What you say brings up for me, it was a note I wrote, I think when you were first talking, that, you know, we talked about resilience a lot on the last panel with a day, and that resilience is created by communities, it's created by restaurants, it's created by coastal communities and small fishers and foragers and others, and by retailers. How do you, it's a complicated and complex way to get you all to work together. Do you feel like that's happening?
I believe so. I think that while the sense of community might be more displaced here in the U.S., when you go further afield, that sense of community is still there. I mean, a lot of production is done by small-scale producers, either farmed or wild-caught, and for us, that community engagement through the certification process is a really, really fundamental principle of what we do. So we try to embrace, of course, all of the human rights issues, but we also look at the community impacts of that production as well, and bring community into that decision making.
Daisy, when you were explaining to your friends who are like part of this, did they feel like sort of that immediate, like, no, this is going to affect my household?
Yeah, they definitely did, and I thought the same thing, but really there's a consumer for all of it. I, in a year, don't want to have this conversation about wild versus farmed anymore. I don't. The truth of it is that they can coexist, and they can be responsible, and they can be sustainable, and it is the way forward. And we need to embrace both. We need to embrace our fishers, and we need to embrace our farmers.
I love it. I love it. Abe, where does the restaurant fit into that? And so, I mean, my last question for you all, and I think we could spend hours talking about this, is the storytelling. It's constant, it's repetitive, it's telling different stories. Restaurants are such a big part. Chefs and workers at restaurants have such a big responsibility that they might not necessarily, again, have the forte for.
No, so, we have the responsibility and the opportunity. From Miami, we're just not as progressive and thoughtful as maybe the West Coast or Western Europe. It's a party town, right? It's about health. It's about the way you look and wellness. So we have to make it cool. And our challenge is to find vocabulary that's that's simple, clever, and creative to make it come alive like on our social to make it come alive, like on the menu. We even think about, how do we not sound preachy when we're talking about kind of the amazingness of our supply chain. But even gobbledygook like business talk about supply chain, that doesn't work for a consumer-facing brand.
It's not sexy? What?
Yeah, I get told that because, again, I'm the business guy in the room, and you hire the creatives to kind of find that language that resonates, and we have that target kind of market, and kind of the coolness kind of filters like a little bit above and below. So we find that, and we spend a lot of time with our university locations kind of trying to find that right pitch.
I love that you brought up semantics and the vocabulary and the creativity that's needed to weave these stories together. Daisy, you have to do that all the time in retail.
Yes, I do, and I have a responsibility to the fishers, the farmers, the consumers, the waterways, and the fish. And my goal is to get more seafood on your plate. And it's not for profit reasons. It's because it is the healthiest protein that you can eat. And it has the lowest carbon footprint. And so anything that I can do to help you get there, please let me help you. Please let a fishmonger help you. Please go and create a relationship with somebody behind the counter or at a restaurant to help you navigate how intimidating and confusing it can be. I understand that it really is, but really the goal is just to have you eat more seafood.
It is intimidating, and I know people are very scared of seafood at home sometimes, so that work is very important. I love that you said that you have a responsibility to the fish. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I've cut a lot of fish in my days, and I know this sounds really dumb, but every time I look at that fish, because they always have eyes, they don't have eyelids, I thank them for being there. I love that they're there, and I love that they're feeding us.
Chris, I imagine that gratitude for communities, for the fish themselves, for the folks that you get to work with is always there. How do you communicate that story sort of constantly?
Well, it's a key part of what we do. And, we're all in this room because seafood and seafood sustainability means something quite integral to what we believe in. But for many, many consumers, that's not the case.
Right.
It's not a topic that's top of agenda. It's about 2 seconds in the store and a quick purchase decision.
And price.
And price, absolutely. Price is so important. So we've got to try and make this. We've got to bring wider appeal as to why you need to do that. And inside the organization, we have our own team of communicators and marketeers, and they work really hard with our clients about just how we do that. How do we promote this story? Because this story needs to be told.
And it's a beautiful story.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful panel. Thank you all so much. Round of applause for them. Thank you all again. Thank you so much.